All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Today, we will be covering resources for substance use disorder patients outside of the clinical setting. So I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items before we introduce our speaker. As usual, all of the lines will remain muted during the webinar to avoid background noise. We are recording this presentation and we'll make it available after the presentation is concluded. We'll send you all a link after the webinar with the recording. And then throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A tab. You can remain anonymous within the Q&A tab if you would like to remain anonymous while asking your question. And then please just keep in mind that we will address questions in about the last 10 minutes of the webinar. And lastly, please be sure to complete the post-training evaluation so that we know how you felt about this webinar, if it was helpful to you, and how we can best provide trainings that are useful to you in the future. So now I'm going to introduce Bree. Today we're excited to have Bree Shave with us. Bree is a woman in long-term recovery. She has over 5 years clean. She's a wife and mother of 2. Bree has worked at the University of Phoenix for almost 3 years as a student admissions administrator. She's also a nursing student and is pursuing her dreams to become a substance use disorder nurse. Her goal is to work in a hospital or detox center, helping others who are currently in the same shoes that she was once in. So we're really grateful to have Bree with us today. And with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Bree.
Thank you, Janelle. Happy to be here. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Okay, so again, my name is Bree Shave, and I'm just going to be talking to you guys a little bit about the different types of resources that there are for substance use disorder outside of the clinical setting. There are a lot of different programs that are available, more than I even knew actually before starting this. So the first program that I want to talk about a little bit is AA and NA. Those are probably the most common recovery programs outside of like detoxes and rehabs. So a lot of people probably have already heard about AA and NA. They are a 12-step recovery program. They have 12 steps and 12 traditions. And their 12 steps are basically just a group of principles that are spiritual in their nature. They don't have a defined higher power, but they are spiritual in their nature, which is, if practiced as a way of life, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. So that's what AA believes their 12 steps help people do. And their 12 traditions apply to the life of the fellowship itself. So this is the way that AA maintains its unity and relates itself to the world about it. So really just guidelines for the AA community. There's also HA, which is Heroin Anonymous, CMA for Crystal Meth Anonymous, and CA for Cocaine Anonymous. And there are other programs as well. Al-Anon is very similar to AA, and that's for basically loved ones of addicts. And they do offer meetings online and in person at this time. So it is really exciting that they are so widely available to people in recovery. The next program is one that I'm really, really passionate about. It's called Celebrate Recovery, or CR for short. Celebrate Recovery is a Christ-based 12-step program. So they are like AA and NA, where they do have 12 steps, but they are Christ-based. So God is their higher power. They have 12 steps and 8 principles. and they help people find freedom from their hurts, habits, and hangups. So when you have Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous focused on alcohol and just drugs, you have Celebrate Recovery, on the other hand, who focuses on all issues that you may be going through. So there are people that attend Celebrate Recovery for anxiety, people that attend Celebrate Recovery because they're going through a rough divorce, people that are codependent find freedom in Celebrate Recovery. So it's really just like a one-stop shop for any and all issues that a person may be going through. And they do offer meetings online currently because of COVID. They don't typically offer meetings online, but they are currently, depending on your area. And then they're also doing in-person meetings as well at this time. And like I said, I'm just really, really passionate about Celebrate Recovery. It's actually where I found my sobriety, and where I gained my freedom from my heroin and meth addiction. And you'll hear that a little bit later on in my story when I share that with you. The next program that I want to talk a little bit about is called Smart Recovery. Now, Smart Recovery is something new. I had never heard of them before, so new to me. I had never heard of them before, but they actually started in 1994. And SMART stands for Self-Management and Recovery Training. And they're not based in spirituality or religion. So in AA and NA, you just need to have a higher power, which could be anything. Anything that you believe is bigger than you can be your higher power. In Celebrate Recovery, God is your higher power. And then in Smart Recovery, there is no higher power because it's not based in spirituality. So I thought that was a pretty cool approach to recovery. They are science and evidence-based, and they do have a 4-point program. Their 4 points are building and maintaining motivation, coping with urges, managing thoughts and feelings and behaviors, and then living a balanced life. So that's what they believe you need to do in order to recover. Their motto is discover the power of choice. And they see addiction as a behavioral problem that can be changed or resolved. They also believe in cognitive behavioral therapy, rational emotive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, and mindfulness and relaxation techniques. So they do have quite a different approach than the previous programs I've talked about, but I was really intrigued by Smart Recovery as I was researching it. And they do have a family and friends program. They have a program for people who are using medication. They have a program for those in correctional institutions, for teens and young adults, and for military veterans. So they really do cover a lot of bases when it comes to recovery. And I thought that was just really, really neat. They are abstinence oriented. So they do believe that in order to be sober, you need to be completely abstinent. The next program is Wellbriety, White Bison. So their vision is to be a sustainable grassroots Wellbriety movement that provides culturally based healing for the next 7 generations of Indigenous people. And their mission is to disseminate culturally based principles, values, and teaching to support healthy community development and servant leadership, and to support healing from alcohol, substance abuse, co-occurring disorders, and intergenerational trauma. And they do have 4 teachings. So they're not 12-step based, and they don't have principles like Celebrate Recovery, but they do have their own teachings, which are the 4 laws of change, healing forest, teaching of the medicine wheel, cycle of life, how to conduct talking circles, and hurt people hurt people. And right now, from what I could tell, they are only offering online meetings at this time. So this next program is really, really cool. It's called the Phoenix Sober Gym. Now, the Phoenix's mission is to build a sober community that feels resilience and harnesses the transformational power of connections so that together we rise, recover, and live. And it's basically just a gym that offers different classes, and some of those classes are yoga, meditation, group fitness, boxing, rock climbing, mountain biking, walking, running, hiking. They have a book club, they have dance and music classes as well. and they've served over 60,600 people. So it is growing pretty large. They do offer meetings in person and online. And I do want you to just pay attention to some of these statistics that are on the screen. So for those that are new to recovery, which is in their first 3 months is considered new, 85% felt increased connectedness, which is huge. The opposite of addiction is community. And I think that that's just huge that 85% felt that increased connectedness to others. 89% felt more hopeful. 94% felt a stronger sense of self-identity, which is also really incredible to me because when you are in active addiction, it's really, really easy to lose yourself and to lose your sense of identity. So that just really blew me away when I saw that statistic. 94% felt an increased meaning in life. 92% felt more empowered, and 87% of members report remaining sober after 3 months. So that's huge. And I think it's just such a cool program to have that physical aspect of your recovery, because taking care of your body is also just as important as taking care of your mind. The next program that I want to talk to you about is called MARA. MARA stands for Medication Assisted Recovery Anonymous. They do have 12 steps and 12 traditions that are similar to AA. And MARA does in-, in-person meetings and Zoom meetings, and they are across multiple states. So this is a program that I wish I would have known about when I was in my addiction, trying to get clean, because I used methadone to try to get clean, and I felt like I didn't really fit in anywhere. I didn't fit into AA and NA because I was still using a medication and they didn't consider me clean, and I just didn't really know where to go. So I thought it was really, really neat that there is its own program to help people that are using medications to stay clean. And with that, I'll just go ahead and start to share some of my story. So these pictures that I just put up, that's my old self, the old me. I'll start off my story. I was a great kid growing up. I got all A's. I was in fast pitch softball team. I was a pitcher for a competitive fast pitch softball team. I played the viola. I did all my chores. I was an awesome kid. And as I grew up, I was feeling low self-esteem, low self-worth. My dad was very verbally abusive and emotionally abusive, and I just never felt good enough. I never felt like I fit in anywhere. And so when I got older, and as a teenager, I fell into the wrong crowd and I started using drugs. I started using when I was 14, started doing cocaine. And then when I was 15, I started smoking meth, and I instantly became addicted to meth. It just completely took over my life. It changed who I was. It changed how I acted. It just totally took over. I barely graduated high school because I was always skipping class to go get high. And shortly after high school, I got pregnant and I had an abortion. And that really was hard on me. It was really hard. And when I was 19, I found heroin for the first time and I started using it. And I know I used it as a way to cope. I didn't have to feel anything. I didn't have to think about anything. All I needed to do was worry about getting high, and that was that. And so for 7 years, I continued my journey with heroin. At first, I just started smoking it, and then I eventually started shooting up. And that was one thing I said I would never, ever do. But when you're on drugs like that, you just don't care. Any sort of self-respect just goes out the window, and you start doing crazy things. I started dating my drug dealer, who is 26 years older than me, when I was 19. And he was really abusive. He was very emotionally abusive and would isolate me. I couldn't go see my family or anything like that because he would say that I was seeing other guys or trying to manipulate me into staying home. And so I was completely isolated. And at that point in time, my family said I was an embarrassment to them and that they didn't want me around. So I just kind of left their lives. I mean, if you look at those photos, that's what I looked like at my best during my addiction. I wish I had pictures of me at my worst during my addiction, but I don't. I wasn't too thrilled to be in front of a camera during those days. So my relationship with my drug dealer continued, um, and I didn't really have to try to get clean because I had a constant supply, and I didn't really have anything worth living for. I had lost all my family. I had lost all my friends. I had lost everything in my life, and all I had left were the drugs. Um, so I had a couple of overdoses where I ended up in the hospital, but those weren't enough to wake me up, and those weren't enough to keep me away from using. Um, so really, in my mind, nothing was going to help me quit, and I was going to die an addict. I was going to die like the girl that you see in those photos. And then I ended up getting pregnant, um, which was a surprise. And I was in huge denial of my pregnancy at first, and kept trying to deny the fact that I was pregnant. And at the same time, sorry if I'm jumping around a little bit. At the same time that I had gotten pregnant, a friend of mine, someone who I thought was a friend, was using my car that I lent her. And she was going around and stealing from the old folks' home that she worked at and pawning the jewelry. So I was facing legal trouble because it was my car that they found all this stolen jewelry and a stolen gun in. And so I got a lawyer. Um, the lawyer told me that I should get on methadone because I was most likely going to jail. And they said that if I was on methadone and went into jail, I could stay on it. But if I went in and wasn't on any medication, that I would just have to detox in jail. So that did not sound like fun to me. So I got on methadone. And then after that is when I found out that I was pregnant. And I didn't know what to do. I was really afraid. I was afraid that the baby was going to be taken away from me and that I wasn't going to get a chance to be a mom. So my crazy self ended up going to Mexico to go see doctors and check on the health of the baby. I was still using, but I had cut back significantly since starting the methadone, which was huge for me. And as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I quit completely. And I just stayed on the methadone. So I was going to Mexico and seeing these doctors, and I was planning on having the baby there, not knowing the language, not knowing where I was, not knowing the person I was with. That's how desperate I was to be a mom. And the way that addicts are looked at here, even though I had quit using, I just didn't feel like I was going to get that chance to be a mom. So I ended up having the baby here, however, because I had missed the van that I was supposed to take to Mexico one morning, and then I went into labor early. So by God's grace, I did have my son here, and I was barely hanging on. I was just getting used to the idea of being pregnant, and now I had this new baby. I was just recently off of drugs, still on methadone, and I was like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing with my life. I didn't know how I was going to stay clean. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had tried rehabs multiple times throughout my teenage years. I had tried rehab 4 times for an inpatient, detoxed 5 times, done 3 intensive outpatients. I had tried everything to stay clean and nothing seemed to work. So I was really, really worried that although I wasn't using, that I was going to go right back to that lifestyle now that I was no longer pregnant. And that's when I found Celebrate Recovery. I had tried AA and NA meetings as well, but I didn't feel very accepted there because I was on medication, and so I wasn't seen as being clean. But when I found Celebrate Recovery, they just accepted me just the way I was and welcomed me with open arms. They were proud of me for being on methadone, and they were proud of me for, trying to stay clean. So that was something that was huge for me. When I had gone to rehabs before, I would always go and get out and start using right away. I had nothing to come home to that was worth living for or worth staying clean for. So while I was able to stay clean in rehabs for that month, I would come back and go right back to my old ways. And what I found out about these meetings, though, is that they really give you a chance to build up a life and a support system around you that is worth living for and is worth staying clean for. I can't even begin to explain how grateful I am for these programs, for these recovery programs that are outside of the clinical setting, that are not in a hospital, that are not in a rehab, because it gives you that chance to build up that support system around you as you're living your day-to-day life. And it allows you to work through your life as life comes your way. And I've been going to Celebrate Recovery since September 2016. And even though I have over 5 years clean, I'm still going to continue to go, probably until the day I die, because those are my people, that is my home, and that's how I stay clean. It doesn't matter how much time I get under my belt, I'm always going to be an addict. So I need to be very careful about maintaining those connections and really, really vigilant about staying in recovery. And so that's pretty much my story. My life now is amazing. I went from being that sick looking woman, with scars or sores all over her body, and MRSA infections and needle marks and everything, to this is my life now. I have over 5 years clean, and my son, who I was using while I was pregnant, he thankfully is perfectly healthy. He's growing just like he should. He's learning just like he should. So I've been very, very blessed with that. And so if you can see in that picture where I'm on my wedding day with me and my son, that one's just so special to me, because his face just brings me so much joy. Like, he is the reason why I got clean, and he's the reason why I'll continue to stay clean. And then I have my beautiful family, as well, which is something I thought I would never have. When I was in my active addiction, I was fine with dying that way. I thought I was going to die that way. And now I'm married. I have a stepdaughter who's 10. I have my son who's 5. I'm going to school to be a nurse so I can work with others who are in the same shoes that I was once in. And I have a very fulfilling life. I'm very active in my recovery program. I sponsor women. I share my testimony. I lead the open share groups. And I'm just very, very grateful for the life that I've been given today through this second chance. And with that, that is all I have to say, Janelle. Oh,
Sorry, I was taking a moment to unmute.
sorry.
So just a second here. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Bree.
Yes.
It really is helpful, I know, to those of us working in these settings, to see success such as yours. So I do want to open it up for questions for Bree, whether that be about Celebrate Recovery, her experience, questions for people in recovery in general. Feel free to start typing them in. One question that I did get, Bree, is if you could explain a little bit, because personally I know about your story, but if you could go into a little bit more about the decision to get care in Mexico for while you were pregnant. If you could just clear up, you were receiving methadone here, right? In Arizona, but
Yes,
then
yes.
you were going to Mexico for like OB care, and to check on your baby, right?
Yes. So basically I was still like an addict and in my addict ways. And I didn't find out I was pregnant until I was like 6 months pregnant. So I had been using that entire time. Knowing that the baby was going to be born with drugs in its system and all of that, I didn't want him taken away from me. So with my crazy addict self, I thought it would be a great idea to go to Mexico. It was actually my boyfriend at the time's idea because he knew people in Mexico. He was from Mexico. So he told me, go to Mexico and see a doctor there to check on the baby and make sure everything's okay. And so I did. I didn't really have any guidance from anyone else. I was, completely lost. I didn't know how to do anything for myself really. And so I went to Mexico to get to check up on the baby. And then I was planning on having the baby there because I was trying to hide it from the government here because I didn't want him taken away from me. And the reason why I didn't was because I did miss that. I missed a bus one morning that was supposed to take me to Mexico and I was going to stay there. And my sister actually had a conversation with me because she knew about my plan. And she had a conversation with me that day and said, I think you missed that bus for a reason. And she told me that I was being selfish and that I wasn't thinking about the baby. I was only thinking about myself. And I was like, me? Like, I'm not selfish. Well, how could you say that? And I took a step back and I realized, wow, I was being really selfish. I was only looking out for myself and not for what was in the best interest of my son. So the methadone clinic here didn't know that I was pregnant until about a few weeks before I had until about a couple of weeks before I had my son. I basically hid the pregnancy and was trying to just have the baby in Mexico so that way he wouldn't be taken away from me.
Thank you for clarifying that. And just from knowing about Bree's story, because to those of you on here who work in our health centers, Bree is featured in an upcoming video series that we've done to reduce stigma around substance use disorder. And so her and her family share about her story in detail in that. And at least from my perspective, it seems like you just didn't have, sober support that you could rely on for advice about what to do. And your family, at what point did your family know that you were pregnant?
I came to them about 7 months pregnant. I hadn't seen them for years. They had been looking for me in hospitals and jails and even morgues, trying to find out where I was, because they thought I was dead. And so I came to them 7 months pregnant and was basically like, hey guys, what's up? And I went to my mom first because I knew she would be the most forgiving. And my mom was like, oh my gosh, are you pregnant? And I was like, yeah. So she took me over to my sister's house and we told my sister, and my sister offered to adopt my son if it came to that, because no one thought I was going to be able to keep this baby. And so we did have that in place, but I was still like gung-ho on my Mexico plan because I thought it was such a good and smart plan. So from there, we told my dad as well. And everyone was just so happy to have me back in their life and to see that I wasn't on drugs anymore. And I still looked really, really unhealthy. If you saw the pictures where I'm holding the baby in the hospital, I was 2 months clean. I got clean 2 months and 1 day before my son was born. And so that picture of me, I'm clean, but like I'm still very, very sick looking, still very, very unhealthy. And yeah, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
No, you're okay. That's great. We do have a question that came in. And so I'm going to read it word for word. Let me know if you want it repeated or anything.
Okay.
So it says, I heard you say I'm an addict. How do you manage that identity? my instinct is to talk about it as a disease that you have versus your identity. But it's also not my experience. Is there a function or a purpose in claiming that identity for you?
So I think that's a really good point. Like, I do view addiction as a disease as well. And I know someone that has diabetes wouldn't be like, hi, my name is Bree and I have diabetes, but I'm perfectly fine with saying, hi, my name is Bree and I'm an addict, because I am an addict. It is part of who I will always be, even though I'm not using anymore. And there is a sort of freedom in being able to say that I'm an addict without worrying about condemnation or people judging me. So it really is just like, it's something not to be proud of, but I'm proud that I'm in recovery.
Thank you for sharing that in your own words. And thank you to the person that asked that question. We often, just being someone who's worked in the substance use disorder space, we hear people in recovery refer to themselves as addicts or alcoholics a lot, right? But as professionals in the professional setting, we try not to label other people. So if Bree wants to have addict as part of her identity, that's up to her, right? To identify that way. We try as professionals, and sometimes we fall short, to not use that language of calling someone an addict, because you may not know how they identify. Maybe they don't identify as an addict. Maybe they identify as an alcoholic. Maybe they identify in a different way. And sometimes that word addict can lead people to stigmatizing language, stigmatizing thoughts. So as professionals, we try to steer away from that. We want to talk more about it as a brain disease, right? As we know it is. But if someone identifies a certain way, it's all right for them personally. We just don't want to label them, if that makes sense. At least that's from my perspective, working with people with substance use disorder. And so there's another question in here. And it says, I wonder if there's anything you feel you could have done differently when you were a teen, 14, 15 years old. My daughter is 14, and I want to make sure I'm insulating her as much as possible. So what do you think about that, Bree? What are your thoughts?
So I definitely could have had more self-respect for myself, more self-worth. When I was 14 is when I started using. I was living with my mom full time at that time, and she didn't have any boundaries or rules for me because my dad was so strict. She was trying to let us do our own thing to kind of make up for that. So I think, as a parent, having those rules and those boundaries with your kid is super important. Not that that's my mom's fault, because my addiction has nothing to do with my mom, but from a parent standpoint, just having rules, having boundaries, having curfews, checking in and seeing what your kid is doing is definitely important. And then from my side, I was just so hateful towards myself, and I just didn't care how I treated myself. I was very promiscuous. I was very, like, I would do all of the drugs. Like, I didn't care what it was. I would do ecstasy, shrooms, cocaine, meth, like, acid, anything I could get my hands on. And when I was 16, actually, is when I overdosed the first time. And I overdosed on, oh my gosh, on Oxycontin. because I had never done it before, and I just knew that it would mess me up, so I decided to do it. And then I overdosed a year later when I was 17 on Oxycontin again, and that was my second time doing that. Because I just didn't care. I was like, I know this will mess me up, and I want to be in an altered state of mind. And so something I could have done differently, though, is as a teen, I was put into an intensive outpatient program called ASAP. And that's a program geared for teenagers. And I could have taken that program more seriously the first time I did it, or even the second time I did it, or even the third time I started it, taking it seriously and just really caring about myself. So I think just instilling that into your child, that they are worth worth so much, and that they are loved and that they should love themselves, is really, really huge.
Thank you for that. The person that had asked said thank you as well. So something else that that kind of brings up that I wanted to ask you, Bree, is will you share your experience with your son as he grows? Is that something that you'll be open with him about?
Yes, definitely. I mean, he's 5 right now, so I don't share that with him. My daughter is 10, my stepdaughter is 10. So they're still too young, but they do come every week to celebrate recovery with us, every single week, and they love it there. They have a kids, a kids area where they're watched and stuff, but they absolutely love Monday night church, is what we call it. And so they know that we go to celebrate recovery. They don't know why. But that's something as they get older that I will definitely share. And just to sort of piggyback off of your question, I do have a younger brother who's 17, and I'm 31 now. So he's quite a bit younger than me, and he grew up with all of that insanity, and, saw me use and saw me messed up. And he was someone that I wanted to share my story with as well when the time came. And I recently just sat him down. I took him out to eat, sat him down and talked to him and shared with him, my journey and my story. And he was really grateful for it, because not only does it help him with his struggles that he's going through, but he finally has that clarity as to why things were the way they were growing up. So I think that when the timing's right, I'm going to sit both of the kids down. But I'm not sure at what magical age that'll be. It just sort of depends on how life goes.
Thank you for that. We do see very often that that substance use disorder can occur in families, and can be somewhat of a cycle for people. And so I think that's really neat that you're going to share your experience with your son.
Mhm.
One other question that we did have is in the chat, someone had mentioned the stigma reduction series. So what I was referring to earlier that Bree is a big part of is a video series that AACHC is currently working on. It's actually in the post-production phase, and hopefully will be released late August or September. And so really the goal around that is to reduce stigma around substance use disorder and around medication assisted treatment. And the target audience is really primary care providers in community health centers. But we're going to make the series available widely. So while it's targeted for providers, it's also easily digestible, easy to understand. And and I think will be beneficial for people in recovery, maybe people in the pre-contemplation phase. It could be helpful for really any professionals working in this space to better understand the experiences of people that are in recovery. And so in that series, Bree sits down with us, talks about some of her story that you all heard here. And then her family also sits down, her father, mother, and her sister. And they sit down and talk a little bit about how her journey impacted them, and what it's like to see her the way she is now. And so I think that this kind of ties in, just to add to the conversation a little bit while we have Bree here, kind of ties into what Bree wants to do with her career and why. So Bree, you shared that you'd like to work as a nurse in detoxes, hospitals and stuff. But what kind of sparked that in you? Is there anything specific?
Yes. So when I had my son, I still, because I was only clean for 2 months and 1 day before I had him. So I still had a horrible MRSA infection all over both of my sides. I had holes that were like an inch deep and wide, and it was a really, really bad MRSA infection. And after I had my son, I was in the hospital and they went to check for bleeding. And when they did that, the nurse saw all of my sores on my side, and she was training a new nurse. And she turned to the new nurse and laughed, like pointed at this and went like, kind of like laughed about my MRSA infection. And I just didn't feel like that was right to treat a patient that way. She didn't know my story or what I had been through, and it was really embarrassing. And that same nurse also, they ended up taking my son and put him down in the nursery to observe him for any withdrawal symptoms. And that nurse wouldn't let me go see him or feed him or anything like that. She just treated me really, really poorly. And then on the flip side of that, there was a nurse working in the nursery that was just absolutely amazing. She was super kind, super sweet. And I told her a little bit about my story, and she believed in me. And she's like, you can do this, you can be a good mom, and you can leave all that past stuff behind. And so just those two encounters with those nurses really sparked that in me, that desire to be a nurse. And at first I thought I wanted to work in labor and delivery because that's where the mistreatment had happened. And I didn't want that to happen to any other new moms in my situation. But then I decided that I really do want to work like in detoxes or rehabs or even hospitals with patients that are struggling with substance use. I just think it's so important to have compassion for your patients. And from being on the other side of it and being treated by nurses who aren't so great and by nurses that are really great, it just really, really made me want to be a nurse.
Thank you for that, Bree. And I think that's helpful for people who are on the webinar to hear, just because you may not feel it always, but you are making a difference to someone by being compassionate. I mean, that can mean the world to someone when they're in their most difficult moments. So does anyone else have any other questions for Bree? Questions about the different groups we talked about today? Feel free to type them in if you do. The evaluation link for this webinar is in the chat. So if you could just please take a few minutes to fill that out. And then I have listed some upcoming learning opportunities through the Alliance. The details of these are on our website under events and training. So feel free to check those out. And to those of you who came today, I'll also be emailing out a resource guide for you to use. It's really intended so that you'll have all the links in one place where you can share them with patients and stuff like that. So I've got it up on my screen here so you can see what I'll be sending out to you all. Has all the different groups we talked about. And then it also has some harm reduction resources as well. We didn't talk much about harm reduction today, but I figured it would be important to put those on there. Primarily, I mean, I'm sure many of you are aware of the naloxone resources in Phoenix and throughout the state. So I have listed those, but I also listed never use alone. So if you have a patient who is still on the fence about getting sober, and they, they're still using, please provide them with the number to never use alone, which is in the resource guide. It's ran by volunteers, and someone will sit on the phone with their patient while they use. And if they're not responding to the person on the phone, then the person on the phone will contact emergency services and report that there's an unresponsive person. And so I believe it's 23. So far with that service, they've saved 23 lives. And thousands upon thousands of people have called that line and stayed on there to ensure that help would come for them if they did overdose. So please share that, because people can't recover if they're not with us. So it's very important. And that's at the end of the resource guide here. So I'll be emailing this out to all of you. They're all clickable links so that you can find in-person and online meetings all over Arizona. We did have a question come in about Celebrate Recovery. Bree, I think this attendee might have come a minute late, but would you just give a brief overview of Celebrate Recovery real quick?
Yeah, of course. So Celebrate Recovery is similar to Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous in the sense that it's a 12-step program, but the difference is it's a Christ-based 12-step program. So where your higher power in AA could be anything that's bigger than you or that you believe to be bigger than you, in Celebrate Recovery, it's a Christ-based 12-step. So God is your higher power. And it helps people find freedom from their hurts, hangups, and habits, whatever that may be. So that's the group that I go to, and I've been going to Celebrate Recovery for years. And there are people there for anxiety, anger, overeating, people that are there for codependency. And it's actually interesting because there aren't that many drug addicts there, surprisingly. And so when I first went, I didn't feel like I fit in there. I thought it wasn't for me because I was like, oh, these are all normal people with normal people problems. And it turns out I was right where I needed to be, and I was very, very welcomed there. But they are available in multiple states. Right now they're doing online and in-person meetings, but it's a really, really great program for any issue that you have. It doesn't necessarily have to be substances. But what I found really helpful about it is that since I am an addict and I do have a hard time navigating life, the people there that are also struggling navigating life have been able to help me along the way. I've been able to learn so much about how to go through life sober through going to that Celebrate Recovery. But yeah, I highly recommend it. That one's just my absolute favorite.
Thank you for sharing your experience with that, Bree, and for kind of giving a recap on Celebrate Recovery. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for sharing your story again. It's very powerful. And I know that everyone on this call likely really benefited from this. So thank you. Thank you very much, Bree. As always, I love learning from you myself, and I know that everyone here really appreciates your willingness to be open and honest, because it helps people better understand.
Thank you, Janelle. I appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak.
And the last question we have, a link to the resource guide. So Sarah, I will provide you with a link to the resource guide as well. I hope it's really helpful for all of you, and you can all share it as you please. I will be receiving the attendee list, and I'll send it out to everyone who was here so that you have that. So with that being said, we're going to end a little bit early, but thank you everyone for being here, and thanks again to Bree for speaking for us today. Everyone have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Yeah.